Let's talk to Dave Mountford, founding member of the former British Pubs, and see what's going on. Dave, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Yeah, very well. I mean, for me, it was a good day yesterday because for me to sit inside a pub with my friends doing a radio show, you know, it's one of the great jobs to have. But I know for you guys, it's been a miserable time. It's been tricky. You've had to spend bucket loads of money to be able to try and make some back. What was yesterday like for you?
Personally, disappointing. Anecdotally, that's pretty much the same from most of the people that we're speaking to. Obviously, it's very early days, but we were. It was quite a disappointing day yesterday. We were as busy as, no busier than we were when we could only sit outside.
Right.
And as I say, I've had a lot of feedback from both members and a lot of publicans that were in contact through social media, and the general opinion was pretty much the same. Now, it's too early days to read too much into that. It may be that, as you quite rightly point out, the weather was dreadful yesterday, and a much nicer day today, and we'll see. But, you know, there is this fear that what we saw once we reopened outside was the hardcore drinkers, for want of a better word, the hardcore people revisiting the pub, and the people that were slightly uncertain about coming back into a pub, but possibly still uncertain.
Right.
So there is that fear. We are, obviously, we've been penalised heavily by the government. We've not been supported very well by the government as an industry. And consequently, a lot of pubs have opened up in substantial debt, having spent a vast amount of money, opened up into an uncertain market, as I think we've just highlighted. You know, it's kind of frightening times for a lot of people out.
It is. I mean, obviously, the fear would be, Dave, that some people are just never going to go back to the pub.
Well, there is that. I mean, there's people have obviously been spending the last year getting used to drinking at home. You know, it's obviously... That is a grave concern. Pubs are the safest place, I genuinely believe, to socialise. The level of safety within them is kind of has been very demanding, quite rightly, and consequently, a lot of publicans out there have spent a vast amount of money on that. There was never any evidence for the level of severity we were put under. We've proved that now as an industry. And the government was kind of pretty hysterical about the way they treated pubs and associated businesses. So, you know, there is that fear factor that we've now got to get over. And I think anybody goes to a pub and goes through that experience right now, I think would come away very comforted. But whether we've got to break that barrier at the start is a real concern.
Well, that's the trouble, isn't it? Because, I mean, if you follow the logic that the government used to shut down the pubs, you'd actually shut down all the hospitals, because the hospitals was where most people got COVID, where most people got sick, and where most people died. But you wouldn't have shut them, you know, despite the fact that they're more dangerous.
The evidence was pitiful. We managed to get our hands on the evidence. I mean, it was released, to be fair, but it was released very quietly. The evidence was based on literally, you know, a Korean and Japanese nightclub and a couple of weddings in Japan. It was really, and I'm not exaggerating, the evidence was very, very weak. And the government had got this wrong. I mean, it was only 2 months ago that Rishi Sunak was quoted live on TV as saying that the average pub rent is between £14,000 and £20,000 a year. The average pub rent in London is £103,000. In the Midlands, it's 55. The other issue, of course,
I mean, if you asked anyone, they could have told him that. You could have asked me, and I'd have told him that.
Well, I mean, it's just ludicrous, but I mean, it demonstrates quite clearly the lack of understanding that governments go, or the lack of information that they're being given. I mean, we've had a long-running concern about the ownership of pubs, obviously, in this country. The majority of pubs are owned by what are effectively property companies, property companies that happen to own property that serve beer, and ultimately that business model, which has been a very controversial business model, shall we say, and that's me being very polite, has resulted in a lot of pubs being sold for alternative use. So there is now a lot of supposed breweries, but, you know, effectively, as I say, they are property companies, and a lot of them which are literally banks, some of them with their head offices in offshore tax havens, who are probably looking at pubs and thinking, you know, let's offload a load. And that is the biggest concern. We are seeing many of our members who are coming to the end of their leases are submitting lease renewals, which is a legal requirement to renew their lease, and those being rejected. automatically. So, I've prophesied that 50% of pubs in this country will go in the next 2 years, and that's, people kind of chuckled at that, but I'm sticking with that. I genuinely am. I think the situation for pubs in this country is an existential crisis. Before the crisis, 19 pubs a week were still shutting. I don't see that changing.
And an awful lot of those organisations you talk about, Dave, have obviously been in a position, if they wanted to help out some of the pub owners, landlords, by the way. Sorry, the publicans who are renting property from them. But they've made it quite difficult, my understanding is that they haven't allowed them sort of any rental holidays. They've insisted that the rental, even if it's not paid, is paid back soon. And that's not very helpful, really, is it?
No, and some of them have behaved appallingly. I mean, that being said, that 50% of the industry roughly have behaved very, very well. There were some very notable breweries. Hall and Woodhouse, worth a mention. They're a small family brewer down in Dorset. They announced straight away they wouldn't be charging rent, and they kept that up right the way through. But some of the large companies, in fact the majority of them, they've deferred rent. They have charged a percentage of rent, but as soon as you come out of lockdown, a lot of those tenants have been forced to do deals to repay that rent in very short periods of time. And some of the approaches that the business companies have approached, especially if you are tied, so you have to buy your beer from them, has been, we won't supply you unless you agree to these terms.
Right, and I mean, presumably at a particular price as well.
Absolutely, yes. And I mean, you're paying ridiculous levels of money for your beer as well. So their behaviour has been what I would describe as very typical. These are regulated companies. These are supposed to be regulated by legislation that people like myself helped introduce back in 2016, which has been a complete and utter failure. That was the Pubs Code. And these businesses are supposed to act in a fair and lawful manner, which has been, unfortunately, far from accurate over the last, prior to the last year, but especially in the last year. As I say, property companies, nothing more, nothing less. They just happen to own property that sells beer. And it's a tragedy, it really is. British heritage being lost.
Yes. And do you think that this kind of hesitation now, which seems to have locked itself into the equation since a couple of days ago, is not going to help? Because obviously a lot of pubs were hopeful that on the 21st of June, you're back to normal. And some people have said to me that they won't go back to a pub until they can stand at the bar, order a drink and stand there drinking it.
I think that's very true. And I mean, that's the truth. For many people, that is the real experience of going to a pub, and not just, we're not just talking about horizontal drinkers. We're talking about people who are perhaps, we have people within our village who come to our pub every evening because they want to spend time talking to the bar staff across the bar, chatting to them, because that's their only point of contact sometimes. Yeah,
but it's also kind of a kind of community outpost for people to get information on what's going on. I mean, I lived in a village in Wiltshire for a long time, and the place to go if you wanted to know what was going on was the local pub.
I've described it as the very first and original social media. Yeah. And I think that's right. Really very true.
It's a lot nicer than social media as well in most cases,
It's a lot friendlier at times, that's for sure. Certainly more than Twitter. But it is, look, the points you make are very valid and they're very, very accurate. You've obviously, it's great that I'm speaking to somebody who's got a really good understanding of what's going out there. It really is, because sometimes we're a little bit ill-served by the media who don't really get it, and it's great to be speaking to somebody that does.
Well, listen, we pride ourselves, Dave, on being the home of common sense, because we actually live like normal people. We don't live, in Notting Hill in a mansion that's worth £3 million, go on television every so often and talk about what the people think they want to know about. These are not people who mix with ordinary people. I mean, we were in a pub yesterday with a great selection of working men, working women, the people who work in the pub themselves. We know what people are going through.
Absolutely. It is, it's tough. It really is. We're a little bit luckier than most. We're privately owned. We're a freehold, so we can buy our beer at a good price. Our rent is accurate and well assessed. But without a doubt, the biggest crisis the industry faces is the rental debt that they're carrying, the CBILS loans that some of them might have got, and the bounce back loans that most of them got. Effectively, pubs are going to be opening up are opening up to a restricted market, lower turnover. They're not going to be anywhere near their break-even point, and they're going to be laden with a vast amount of debt. To anybody, that's just a crisis, and it doesn't matter how. Some people need to be 3 or 4 times busier than they were before COVID just to get to their break-even point, and that isn't going to happen. You just don't see it.
No, absolutely right. And if they don't allow us to know what's going to happen on 21st of June, I mean, I've said earlier today, I don't know why they're bothering to have a cabinet meeting now if they're not going to decide until about the 15th precisely what they're going to do next. You can't really make plans, can you?
No, people, ordering, people don't understand. A cap scale is a live product. You have to buy it, you have to tap it, you have to let it settle. If you're a food-led pub, you've got to buy, your food. I mean, people are having to do what we're doing. That's changing their menu from literally one week to the next. Yeah. It's almost impossible to plan. And that hasn't helped, obviously, because people aren't sure what hours you're opening, because you don't know yourself, because you don't know how many staff to bring back. And it's tough. It really is tough.
Yeah,
no doubt about it.
I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? And I mean, just in terms of the sheer numbers of people, and because the other thing that people forget is that it's in certain parts of London, certain pubs will be doing okay. In certain parts of the country, though, where there's nobody going, where there's no people working, if it was a pub that was maybe used in the city here in London, where people from Lloyd's Insurance used to go, or a pub in Canary Wharf, there's nobody there. And so until people start getting back to work properly, there's an awful lot of business that you won't even get anyway.
No, absolutely. So, I had a couple of members speaking to me last night, and one of them is based very close to a mainline railway station, and their business is based around the kind of 5 o'clock and traffic that comes back from people, commuters, and they're just not there, as you say. So the market out there for publicans is so wide and varied. It is almost impossible to treat them as a catch-all situation. We're a tourist-led pub. We're in the Peak District in Derbyshire. Yeah. And that is, so we're not getting that footfall at this moment in time. In the summer, hopefully we will. We're surviving on our locals in our small village. And for a lot of pubs, that's not going to be enough.
It really isn't. Well, listen, Dave, I wish you all the best. As soon as we get some news that we can give you that's any good, we will certainly give it to you. And just keep up the good fight, and we'll see if we can get there. Dave Mountford, their founding member of the Forum of British Pubs, a publican himself, of course, somebody who has fought all the way through this pandemic in order to try and keep the pub open. And the fact now that the government is kind of wavering again and saying, we're not sure, we might have to actually reverse the opening of the restrictions, or we might have to not open it any further on June the 21st. Well, it's simply not good enough. Just because Sage are sitting there, rubbing their little hands together going, we don't want to leave, we want to stay here, we want to keep frightening you, we want to keep having a job, we want to keep going on television to tell everybody how dangerous everything is. Well, no, that's not the way forward, I'm afraid.